Every day, people waste years fighting battles that can never be won. They argue with stubborn people. They try to change minds that refuse to change. They spend their energy proving they are right, only to end up frustrated, exhausted, and angry. But here's the truth. The biggest idiot in your life may not be the person you're arguing with. It may be the version of you that keeps stepping into the same pointless conflicts over and over again. This audiobook is not about defeating idiots. It is about understanding them, escaping their traps, and making sure you don't become one yourself. The moment you understand this, your relationships, your peace of mind, and your entire life begin to change. Chapter 1. Stop trying to win every argument. Most people spend their lives fighting battles they were never meant to win. Not because they are weak, not because they are wrong, but because they misunderstand the nature of the battle itself. They think arguments are about facts. They think arguments are about evidence. They think arguments are about discovering the truth. Most of the time they are not. Most arguments are about identity. That's the first lesson you need to understand. When people defend an opinion, they are often defending something much deeper than an idea. They are defending their image of themselves. They are defending their tribe. They are defending the story they tell themselves about who they are. And when you attack that belief, they feel as though you are attacking them. That's why logic often fails. That's why facts often fail. That's why evidence often fails. Because the argument was never really about the facts in the first place. Think about politics. Two intelligent people can sit across from each other and argue for hours. Each side presents statistics. Each side presents examples. Each side believes they are being rational. Yet when the conversation ends, nobody changes their mind. Nobody says, "You know what? You're right." Nobody walks away transformed. Instead, both people leave convinced they won. How is that possible? Because they were never fighting over facts. They were protecting identities. And this happens everywhere, in marriages, in friendships, at work, on social media, even within families. People cling to beliefs because those beliefs have become part of who they are. That's why trying to force someone to change rarely works. The harder you push, the harder they resist. The louder you become, the more defensive they become. The more determined you are to prove your point, the more determined they become to reject it. You have a choice. You can continue trying to win every argument, or you can start understanding the person behind the argument. That's the key. Winning the argument is easy. Winning the person is hard. Read that again in your mind. Winning the argument is easy. Winning the person is hard. Most people never learn this lesson. They become addicted to being right. They treat every disagreement like a competition. Every conversation becomes a courtroom. Every discussion becomes a battlefield. Every opinion becomes a threat. And eventually they discover something painful. Being right does not always make your life better. Sometimes being right costs you your peace. Sometimes being right costs you relationships. Sometimes being right costs you opportunities. You have probably experienced this yourself. Think back to the last major argument you had. Maybe it was with a spouse, maybe it was with a friend, maybe it was with a coworker. Ask yourself one question. What was your real objective? Was it understanding or was it victory? Be honest. Most people are not seeking understanding. They are seeking validation. They want confirmation that they are smarter, more informed, more correct, more justified. But that desire creates a trap. Because once your goal becomes winning, you stop listening. And the moment you stop listening, learning stops. Growth stops. Connection stops. Everything stops. The conversation becomes a contest. And contests always produce winners and losers. The problem is that nobody enjoys feeling like a loser. So people fight harder, defend harder, attack harder, and the cycle continues. This is why emotionally intelligent people approach disagreement differently. They don't enter every conversation trying to conquer. They enter trying to understand. That doesn't mean they become weak. It doesn't mean they abandon their values. It doesn't mean they agree with nonsense. It means they recognize something important. Understanding someone is not the same as agreeing with them. You can understand someone's fears without accepting their conclusions. You can understand someone's perspective without adopting their worldview. You can understand someone and still disagree completely. That's maturity. That's discipline. It's not about dominance, it's about awareness. The next time you find yourself in an argument, pause. Don't immediately defend yourself. Don't immediately prepare your next response. Ask a simple question. What is this person really protecting? Maybe they are protecting pride. Maybe they are protecting fear. Maybe they are protecting a belief that has guided their life for decades. Maybe they are protecting a wounded part of themselves. When you begin looking beneath the surface, everything changes. The conversation changes. Your attitude changes. Your frustration decreases. Because now you understand that the argument is only the symptom. The deeper issue is what matters. That's the key. Winning the argument is easy. Winning the person is hard. And if you're honest, most of the arguments you've won have changed absolutely nothing. The other person remained the same. The relationship remained strained. The conflict remained unresolved. So what exactly did you win? A temporary feeling of superiority? An ego boost? A momentary sense of victory? That's not real power. Real power is influence. Real power is connection. Real power is knowing when proving yourself is unnecessary. You don't need their permission. You don't need their approval. You don't need to win every debate to validate your intelligence. The strongest people in the room are often the least interested in proving they are right, because they understand something everyone else misses. Not every battle deserves your energy. Not every disagreement deserves your attention. Not every opinion deserves a response. You have a choice. Every single day, you can fight for victory, or you can fight for understanding. One creates conflict, the other creates wisdom. One feeds the ego, the other strengthens character. One traps you in endless arguments, the other sets you free. Winning the argument is easy. Winning the person is hard. And that lesson brings us directly to the next truth. Because if arguments are not really about facts, then why do some people become so difficult, stubborn, and impossible to reach in the first place? Let's answer that question now. Chapter 2. The real reason people become impossible. Have you ever met someone who seemed impossible to deal with? Someone who refuses to listen. Someone who overreacts to the smallest criticism. Someone who turns every conversation into a struggle for control. At first glance, these people seem irrational. They seem stubborn. They seem difficult. They seem impossible. But what if you're looking at the wrong thing? What if the behavior is not the real problem? What if the behavior is only the symptom? Because behind every unreasonable reaction is a hidden reason. That's the key. Most people judge behavior. Very few people investigate what created it. They see anger, but they don't see the fear underneath it. They see arrogance, but they don't see the insecurity driving it. They see control, but they don't see the anxiety hiding behind it. This is where wisdom begins, not by asking, why is this person so difficult? But by asking, what is this person protecting? Because behind every unreasonable reaction is a hidden reason. Think about a controlling boss. You've probably met one before. They micromanage everything. They question every decision. They constantly demand updates. They refuse to trust anyone. From the outside, they look arrogant, power-hungry, obsessed with control. But look deeper. What if they are terrified of failure? What if they secretly believe that losing control means losing respect? What if every act of control is actually an act of fear? Suddenly, the behavior makes sense. That doesn't mean the behavior is acceptable. It means it becomes understandable, and understanding changes everything. You have a choice. You can react to the behavior, or you can understand the fear creating the behavior. Most people choose reaction. Very few choose understanding. That's why most people remain trapped in conflict. Imagine a person who becomes defensive every time they receive feedback. You suggest a small improvement, immediately they argue, immediately they justify themselves, immediately they become hostile. Why? Is it because they hate learning? Maybe. But often it's something deeper. Maybe they grew up being criticized constantly. Maybe every correction feels like an attack. Maybe every piece of feedback awakens an old wound. Again, this doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains it. An explanation creates perspective. Perspective creates patience. Patience creates influence. That's the key. Behind every unreasonable reaction is a hidden reason. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that difficult behavior comes from confidence. Many times it comes from insecurity. The loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. Sometimes they are the most afraid. The most controlling person is not always the most powerful. Sometimes they are the most anxious. The most arrogant person is not always the most secure. Sometimes they are desperately trying to convince themselves they matter. You see the behavior, but you don't see the battle. And every person is fighting a battle you cannot see. That's why emotional intelligence matters. Emotional intelligence allows you to look beneath the surface. It allows you to stop reacting automatically. It allows you to ask better questions. Instead of saying, "Why is this person so difficult?" Ask, "What fear is driving this?" Instead of saying, "Why are they acting this way?" Ask, "And what are they protecting?" Those questions change everything, because difficult people are rarely difficult on purpose. Most are operating from pain. Most are operating from fear. Most are operating from insecurity, and many don't even realize it themselves. That's why trying to defeat them often fails. You cannot argue someone out of an emotional wound. You cannot debate someone out of a deep insecurity. You cannot use logic to heal fear. That's not how people work. Human beings are emotional first, rational second. That's a hard truth. But once you understand it, your relationships improve dramatically. You stop taking everything personally. You stop assuming every negative behavior is about you. You stop carrying unnecessary anger. You stop wasting energy fighting symptoms. And start understanding causes. You have a choice. Every difficult person who enters your life presents that choice. You can become frustrated, or you can become curious. Frustration asks, "What's wrong with them?" Curiosity asks, "What happened to them?" One creates conflict, the other creates understanding. One drains your energy, the other expands your wisdom. It's not about judgment, it's about awareness. It's not about winning, it's about understanding. It's not about attacking behavior, it's about identifying the fear behind it. That's the key. Now let's be clear. Understanding someone does not mean becoming their victim. It does not mean tolerating abuse. It does not mean accepting toxic behavior. Boundaries still matter. Consequences still matter. Respect still matters. But when you understand what's driving someone's actions, you stop becoming emotionally trapped by them. You stop reacting blindly. You start responding intentionally. And that is power, real power. Because the moment you understand that most difficult people are protecting invisible fears, something changes inside you. Compassion grows, patience grows, wisdom grows, and conflict loses much of its power over you. Remember this phrase. Repeat it often. Behind every unreasonable reaction is a hidden reason. Behind every unreasonable reaction is a hidden reason. Behind every unreasonable reaction is a hidden reason. The people who master relationships understand this. The people who remain trapped in conflict never do. But there is still one obstacle standing in your way. One force that keeps arguments alive. One force that prevents understanding. One force that turns small disagreements into major battles. And that force lives inside you. Because before you can truly understand others, you must first understand the part of yourself that always wants to be right. That's where we're going next. Chapter 3, Your Ego is Making Everything Worse. There is an enemy that follows you everywhere. It shows up in arguments, it shows up in relationships, it shows up at work, it shows up online, it even shows up when you're completely alone, and most people never recognize it. That enemy is the ego, not confidence, not self-respect, not healthy pride, the ego. The part of you that must always be right, the part of you that hates being corrected, the part of you that treats every disagreement like a threat, the part of you that would rather protect its image than discover the truth. And if you're not careful, your ego will create more problems than all the difficult people in your life combined. That's the key. Most conflicts are not caused by disagreement. They are caused by the need to be right. Think about that. Two people can disagree peacefully. Two intelligent people can hold completely opposite opinions and still respect one another. Disagreement is not the problem. The ego is. The ego turns disagreement into combat. The ego turns discussion into competition. The ego turns conversations into battles that nobody wins. And once the ego enters the room, understanding leaves. The ego wants victory. Wisdom wants understanding. Never forget that. The ego wants victory. Wisdom wants understanding. Look at what happens in many relationships. A husband says something careless. A wife feels hurt. The issue is small. It could be resolved in 2 minutes. A simple apology would solve everything. But then the ego arrives. Suddenly, nobody wants to admit fault. Nobody wants to be the first to apologize. Nobody wants to appear weak. Hours pass, then days. What began as a small misunderstanding becomes a major conflict. Not because the issue was serious, because the ego made it serious. The ego says, if I apologize, I lose. Wisdom says, if I apologize, the relationship wins. That's the difference. You have a choice. You can protect your ego, or you can protect your peace. You can protect your pride, or you can protect your relationships. Most people choose pride and then wonder why their lives are filled with unnecessary conflict. It's not about stubbornness. It's about discipline. The discipline to recognize when your ego is speaking. The discipline to pause before reacting. The discipline to admit when you're wrong. That takes strength, real strength. Anyone can defend themselves. Anyone can justify themselves. Anyone can blame someone else. But it takes maturity to say 3 powerful words. I was wrong. Those words are difficult because they threaten the ego. But those words are also liberating. Because the moment you stop pretending to be perfect, you become free to grow. Growth requires humility. Growth requires honesty. Growth requires the ability to see yourself clearly. And the ego hates all 3. The ego wants you to believe you're always right. The ego wants you to believe everyone else is the problem. The ego wants you to believe that changing is unnecessary. But the truth is different. If every conflict in your life seems to involve difficult people, eventually you must ask yourself a difficult question. What role am I playing in these conflicts? That's not comfortable, but that's where transformation begins. The first person you must examine is yourself. Not because you're always wrong, but because you're the only person you can control. You don't need their permission. You don't need them to change first. You don't need them to admit fault before you improve. You have a choice. Every argument presents that choice. The choice between ego and wisdom, the choice between reaction and reflection, the choice between proving and improving. Most people spend years trying to change others. Very few spend time changing themselves. And that's why they stay stuck. Because personal growth begins the moment you stop asking, how can I win? And start asking, what can I learn? That's the key. Every disagreement contains a lesson. Every criticism contains information. Every conflict reveals something about you. Maybe it reveals impatience. Maybe it reveals insecurity. Maybe it reveals fear. Maybe it reveals pride. The question is whether you're willing to look, because the ego doesn't want self-awareness. The ego wants self-protection. The ego wants victory. Wisdom wants understanding. Let's make this practical. The next time someone corrects you, resist the urge to defend yourself immediately. Listen. Pause. Ask yourself a question. What if they are partially right? Not completely right. Partially right. Even that small shift changes everything. Because now you're learning instead of fighting, growing instead of defending, improving instead of proving. That's where real power lives. Not in domination, not in superiority, not in always having the last word. Real power is the ability to remain teachable. Real power is the ability to remain humble. Real power is the ability to prioritize truth over pride. And here's something most people never understand. The ego promises protection, but delivers isolation. The ego promises victory, but creates loneliness. The ego promises strength, but often reveals weakness. Because the strongest people aren't those who never admit mistakes. The strongest people are those who can acknowledge mistakes without feeling threatened by them. They understand that being wrong is not failure. Refusing to learn is failure. That's the key. The ego wants victory. Wisdom wants understanding. The ego wants the last word. Wisdom wants growth. The ego wants to appear strong. Wisdom wants to become strong. And the more you choose wisdom, the less conflict controls your life. Because most arguments are not won through intelligence. They are lost through ego. Remember that. The battle is rarely between you and another person. The battle is often between your ego and your potential. Win that battle and everything changes. But there is another mistake people make after overcoming their ego. They assume every misunderstanding can be solved with more explanations. It can't. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you, and learning how to deal with those people is the next step. 4. Stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. One of the most exhausting habits in life is trying to convince people who have already made up their minds about you. You explain, you clarify, you defend yourself, you provide evidence, you repeat yourself, and somehow nothing changes. The misunderstanding remains, the accusation remains, the judgment remains. Why? Because not everyone is looking for clarity. Some people are looking for confirmation. That's the key. They are not listening to understand. They are listening to reinforce what they already believe. And once you understand this, you stop wasting energy on unwinnable conversations. Most people assume that if they can just explain themselves better, the problem will disappear. If they can find the perfect words, the perfect example, the perfect argument, then finally they will be understood. But life doesn't work that way, because understanding requires willingness, and not everyone is willing. You have a choice. You can spend your life chasing understanding from people who refuse to understand, or you can accept reality and move forward. One path leads to frustration, the other leads to freedom. Look at social media. Every day, millions of people argue with strangers. They present facts, links, evidence, research. Hours pass, sometimes days, yet nobody changes their mind. Why? Because the debate was never about discovering truth. The debate was about defending identity. The debate was about proving loyalty to a belief. The debate was about winning. And when people are committed to being right, evidence becomes irrelevant. That's why you can show someone facts and still watch them reject every one of them. Not because they are unintelligent, because their emotion have already decided the outcome. The mind simply follows. That's the key. Some people do not seek clarity, they seek confirmation. And if you don't understand that, you will waste years explaining yourself to the wrong people. Think about your own life. Maybe you've experienced this at work. A co-worker assumes the worst about you. No matter what you do, they interpret your actions negatively. You explain, they twist your words. You clarify, they question your motives. You defend yourself. They become more suspicious. Eventually you realize something important. The problem isn't your explanation. The problem is their commitment to misunderstanding you. And that realization changes everything. Because now you stop trying to win impossible battles. You stop chasing approval from unwilling people. You stop surrendering your peace for the sake of being understood. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Repeat that. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Not everyone deserves an explanation. That doesn't mean you become rude. It doesn't mean you become defensive. It doesn't mean you stop communicating. It means you become selective. You learn the difference between someone who is confused and someone who is committed to confusion. Those are not the same thing. A confused person wants clarity. A committed critic wants ammunition. A confused person asks questions. A committed critic looks for flaws. A confused person listens. A committed critic waits for their turn to attack. Knowing the difference will save you enormous amounts of energy. You have a choice. Every misunderstanding presents that choice. You can keep explaining, or you can recognize when the conversation has reached its limit. Many people continue explaining because of fear. They fear being judged. They fear being disliked. They fear losing control of how others perceive them. But here's the truth. You cannot control another person's interpretation of you. You cannot force understanding. You cannot force fairness. You cannot force honesty. You can only control your actions. That's the key. The moment you accept this, a huge burden falls from your shoulders, because now you're no longer trying to manage everyone's opinion. You're simply managing your own character. And there is a massive difference between the two. It's not about convincing, it's about clarity. It's not about approval, it's about integrity. It's not about controlling perception, it's about controlling behavior. You don't need their permission. You don't need their approval. You don't need every person to understand your intentions before you move forward with your life. Some people will misunderstand you no matter what you say. Some people will criticize you no matter what you do. Some people will create negative stories about you regardless of the facts. And the more successful you become, the more often this happens. That's why emotionally mature people stop trying to correct every false impression. They stop responding to every accusation. They stop chasing every critic. Instead, they focus on living in alignment with their values. Because eventually, consistent behavior speaks louder than endless explanations. Real strength is knowing when to speak. Greater strength is knowing when to stop. Many people think silence means weakness. Often it means wisdom, because wisdom understands that not every battle deserves engagement. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every opinion deserves a response. Not everyone deserves an explanation. That's the lesson. Protect your energy. Protect your peace. Protect your focus. Stop explaining yourself to people who have no intention of understanding you. Start investing that energy into becoming the person you claim to be. Let your actions speak. Let your consistency speak. Let your character speak. Because in the end, explanations are temporary. Character is permanent. You have a choice. Chase validation or build credibility. Chase approval or build integrity. One creates exhaustion, the other creates freedom. And once you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, another powerful skill becomes available to you. The ability to say less, the ability to stop feeding conflict, the ability to use silence as strength instead of weakness. That's where true emotional mastery begins. Chapter 5. Learn the art of strategic silence. Chapter 5. Learn the art of strategic silence. Most people think power comes from having the perfect response, the perfect argument, the perfect comeback, the perfect way to put someone in their place. They believe that if they can just say the right thing, they will win. But life teaches a different lesson. Some battles are won by speaking. Many are won by remaining silent. That's the key. One of the greatest skills you can develop is knowing when not to respond. Not because you have nothing to say, not because you're afraid, not because you've lost, because you've recognized something important. Every response is a choice. Silence is also a response. Read that again. Every response is a choice. Silence is also a response. Most people never learn this. They react automatically. Someone insults them. They react. Someone criticizes them. They react. Someone misunderstands them. They react. Someone provokes them. They react. Their emotions take control. Their mouth follows. And before they realize it, they've turned a small spark into a raging fire. This happens every day. At work, at home, online, in friendships, in marriages. One careless comment becomes a heated argument. One emotional reaction becomes a damaged relationship. One unnecessary response becomes a conflict that lasts for months. Not because the situation demanded it, because someone couldn't remain silent. You have a choice. Every single time you feel the urge to react, you can feed the conflict or you can starve it. Most people feed it. The wise learn to starve it. Think about a workplace conflict. An employee makes a mistake. A manager becomes frustrated. Harsh words are exchanged. Tension fills the room. Now imagine two possible outcomes. In the first scenario, the employee reacts emotionally. They defend themselves. They attack back. The manager becomes even more aggressive. The conflict grows. The relationship suffers. The workplace becomes toxic. In the second scenario, the employee pauses. They listen. They refuse to escalate. They remain calm. The manager eventually runs out of emotional fuel. The tension fades. The conflict dies. What changed? Not the circumstances. The response. That's the key. Every response is a choice. Silence is also a response. Many people fear silence because they misunderstand it. They think silence means weakness. They think silence means surrender. They think silence means losing. It doesn't. Strategic silence is not weakness. Strategic silence is discipline. It's not about avoidance. It's about control. It's not about fear. It's about wisdom. Because not every statement deserves an answer. Not every insult deserves a defense. Not every accusation deserves a rebuttal. Not every challenge deserves engagement. The mature person understands this. The immature person responds to everything. That's why emotional mastery is so rare. Most people allow other people to control their emotions. Someone pushes a button, they react. Someone says something offensive, they react. Someone questions them, they react. At that moment, who is really in control? Certainly not them. Real power begins when you decide that not every trigger deserves your attention. You don't need their permission, you don't need their approval, and you certainly don't need to respond to every provocation that comes your way. Some people provoke because they want attention. Others provoke because they want control. Others provoke because they want an emotional reaction. When you react exactly as they expect, you give them what they want. When you remain calm, you take your power back. That's the key. Every response is a choice. Silence is also a response. Let's make this practical. Chapter 6. Stop feeding the conflict. Most conflicts do not survive because they are powerful. They survive because they are fed. Every argument, every grudge, every feud, every toxic relationship, every endless disagreement, they all require fuel. And that fuel is attention, emotion, participation. That's the key. Many people spend years asking how to end conflict. Very few ask a more important question. How am I helping this conflict stay alive? That question changes everything, Because conflict is rarely a one-person activity. It takes two people to keep a fight going, two people to keep arguing, two people to keep revisiting the past, two people to keep reopening old wounds. And as long as both continue supplying emotional energy, the conflict survives. What you feed grows. What you starve dies. Never forget that. What you feed grows. What you starve dies. Look at family disputes. Some families carry the same argument for decades. A disagreement that started years ago still controls conversations today. People still remember the insults, still remember the betrayal, still remember who was wrong, still remember who should apologize. And because nobody lets go, the conflict survives. Generation after generation, year after year. Not because the original problem was impossible to solve, because everyone keeps feeding it. Every time they revisit it, every time they complain about it, every time they relive it emotionally, they add fuel to the fire, and then they wonder why the fire keeps burning. You have a choice. You can continue feeding old conflicts, or you can begin starving them. One path creates bitterness. The other creates freedom. Most people underestimate the power of attention. Whatever receives your attention gains strength. Think about that. The more attention you give a criticism, the larger it becomes. The more attention you give an insult, the more power it gains. The more attention you give a toxic person, the more influence they have over your emotions. Attention is energy, and where your energy goes, growth follows. That's why some people remain trapped by problems that should have disappeared years ago. Not because the problem is powerful, because they continue feeding it. It's not about resentment, it's about discipline. The discipline to stop revisiting what no longer serves you. The discipline to stop rehearsing old pain. The discipline to stop carrying yesterday's conflict into today's life. That is emotional maturity, and it is rare. Most people believe that letting go means losing. It doesn't. Letting go often means winning. Winning your peace back, winning your energy back, winning your focus back. Because conflict is expensive. It costs attention, it costs emotional energy, it costs time, it costs opportunities, and many people spend those resources carelessly. Think about the last time someone upset you. How much time did you spend replaying the event in your mind? Hours? Days? Weeks? Maybe even months. Meanwhile, the other person may have moved on completely, yet the conflict remained alive inside you. Why? Because you kept feeding it. That's the key. What you feed grows. What you starve dies. Now, this doesn't mean ignoring serious problems. It doesn't mean becoming passive. It doesn't mean allowing bad behavior. Some issues require action. Some situations require boundaries. Some people require consequences. But there is a difference between addressing a problem and feeding a problem. Addressing solves. Feeding sustains. The wise person learns the difference. Let's make this practical. The next time you find yourself thinking about a conflict, ask yourself a simple question. Am I solving this or am I feeding it? Be honest. If you're simply replaying the same story, rehearsing the same anger, reliving the same frustration, you're feeding it. And every time you feed it, you strengthen it. You have a choice. You can continue carrying the burden, or you can put it down. Many people wait for someone else to change before they let go. They wait for an apology. They wait for justice. They wait for acknowledgement. They wait for closure. Sometimes those things never come. What then? Do you remain trapped forever? No, because your freedom cannot depend entirely on another person's behavior. You don't need their permission. You don't need their apology. You don't need their cooperation to stop feeding the conflict. That's where your power begins. The moment you realize you control your participation, you control your attention, you control your emotional investment, and once you control those things, conflict begins losing its grip on your life. The strongest people are not those who win every fight. The strongest people are those who know which fights deserve no fuel. They understand that some fires burn out when ignored. Some conflicts disappear when starved. Some arguments end when one person simply refuses to continue. That's wisdom. That's discipline. That's strength. It's not about revenge. It's about release. It's not about punishment. It's about peace. It's not about winning the conflict. It's about refusing to become consumed by it. What you feed grows. What you starve dies. Carry that lesson with you. Apply it to every argument, every resentment, every unnecessary battle, because the quality of your life is often determined by what you choose to feed. Feed growth, feed wisdom, feed peace, starve drama, starve resentment, starve unnecessary conflict. And when you stop feeding conflict, something remarkable happens. You create space, space to understand people more deeply, space to see beyond behavior, space to recognize perspectives that once seemed impossible to understand. That's where we're going next. Chapter 7. See the world through their eyes. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming that if someone disagrees with them, that person must be foolish, must be ignorant, must be irrational, must be wrong. But life is rarely that simple. People do not arrive at their beliefs by accident. People are shaped by experiences, by environments, by fears, by victories, by losses, by years of lessons that you may know nothing about. That's the key. When you understand this, something changes. You stop asking, how can they believe that? And start asking, what experiences led them to believe that? That question transforms relationships, because understanding begins where judgment ends. Many people confuse understanding with agreement. They think that if they try to understand someone, they must also approve of them. They must surrender their values. They must abandon their convictions. That is not true. You do not need to agree to understand. Repeat that. You do not need to agree to understand. You do not need to agree to understand. Those words are powerful because they free you from a false choice. The choice between agreement and rejection. In reality, there is a third option: understanding. You can completely disagree with someone and still understand why they think the way they do. And once you develop that skill, conflict loses much of its power over you. Think about a stubborn parent. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. A parent who seems old-fashioned, rigid, unwilling to change. A parent whose opinions frustrate you. At first glance, their behavior seems unreasonable. But then you look deeper. You discover they grew up during difficult times. They lived through hardship, financial struggles, instability, loss. Suddenly, some of their beliefs begin to make sense. Not because those beliefs are necessarily correct, because you understand where they came from. The fear, the uncertainty, the experiences that shape them. That's the key. You do not need to agree to understand. Most people never make the shift. They stay trapped on the surface. They see behavior but never investigate the story behind it. They see stubbornness but never see the fear. They see anger but never see the pain. They see control but never see the insecurity. As a result, they spend their lives reacting to symptoms rather than understanding causes. You have a choice. Every interaction gives you that choice. You can judge, or you can understand. One creates distance, the other creates connection. One creates frustration, the other creates wisdom. This doesn't mean everyone is right. Far from it. Some people hold harmful beliefs. Some people make poor decisions. Some people behave badly. Understanding does not change those facts. What it changes is your perspective. Because once you understand someone's reasoning, even flawed reasoning, you stop being surprised by their behavior. And when you're no longer surprised, you're no longer constantly frustrated. That's emotional freedom. Imagine someone who constantly worries about money. No matter how much they earn, They remain anxious. They save excessively. They fear spending. At first, their behavior seems irrational. Then you learn they grew up in poverty. They experience instability. They watch their family struggle. Suddenly, their actions make sense. Again, understanding is not agreement. It is awareness. And awareness changes everything. It's not about judgment. It's about curiosity. It's not about criticism. It's about perspective. It's not about proving them wrong. It's about seeing the full picture. That's the key. One of the most valuable habits you can develop is asking better questions. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with this person?" ask, "What shaped this person?" Instead of asking, "Why are they acting this way?" ask, "What experiences led them here?" Those questions create empathy, and empathy is one of the most powerful tools for reducing conflict. Not because empathy solves every problem, because empathy reduces unnecessary hostility. It reminds you that people are more complicated than their behavior, more complicated than their opinions, more complicated than your first impression. You have a choice. You can view people as problems, or you can view them as stories. Stories shaped by experiences you may never fully understand. The second approach makes life much easier, because when you understand people, you stop expecting them to think exactly like you. You stop demanding that they see the world through your lens, and you become more adaptable, more patient, more effective. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Many people spend years trying to change others. The wiser approach is often to understand them first, because understanding creates influence. Judgment creates resistance. Understanding creates communication. Judgment creates conflict. Understanding creates possibilities. Judgment creates walls. You do not need to agree to understand. Remember that. Carry it into every conversation, every disagreement, every difficult relationship, every encounter with someone who sees the world differently than you do. Because the goal is not uniformity. The goal is understanding. And once you begin seeing the world through other people's eyes, something unexpected happens. You begin seeing yourself more clearly as well. You start recognizing your own blind spots, your own assumptions, your own irrational behaviors. And that awareness leads to one of the most important lessons in this entire journey. Before you can stop dealing with idiots, you must make sure you're not becoming one yourself. That's where we're going next. Chapter 8. The fastest way to stop being an idiot yourself. There is a hard truth most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The difficult person is not always someone else. Sometimes it's you, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's all of us. That truth is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating, because the moment you stop focusing exclusively on other people's flaws, you gain the power to transform your own life. That's the key. Most people are experts at identifying other people's mistakes. They can spot arrogance, stubbornness, impulsiveness, pride, ignorance. Yet they remain completely blind to those same qualities within themselves. And that blindness creates suffering, because you cannot improve what you refuse to see. The first person you must understand is yourself. Repeat that. The first person you must understand is yourself. The first person you must understand is yourself. Every person who has ever lived has made foolish decisions. Every person, no exceptions. The difference is that wise people learn from those moments. Others repeat them. Think back 5 years, 10 years, maybe even 1 year. Can you remember a decision that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time but now appears ridiculous? Of course you can. Maybe it was a relationship, a financial decision, a business opportunity, an argument, a friendship. At the time, you were convinced you were right, certain, confident, sure of yourself. Now you look back and wonder what you were thinking. Why? Because emotions were influencing your judgment. And when emotions take control, intelligence often takes a back seat. That's the key. Human beings are not nearly as rational as they imagine. We like to think we make decisions logically, but often we make decisions emotionally and then justify them intellectually afterward. That realization should make you humble, because it means that even now, at this very moment, there are things you believe that future you may completely disagree with. There are decisions you're making today that you may later regret. There are blind spots you cannot currently see. That's why humility matters. Humility keeps the mind open. Pride closes it. You have a choice. You can assume you're always right, or you can remain curious. One path creates growth, the other creates stagnation. Most people become trapped because they never question themselves. They question everyone else, but not themselves. They analyze everyone else's behavior, but not their own. They demand accountability from others, but avoid accountability for themselves. And that is how people become the very thing they criticize. It's not about perfection, it's about awareness. Nobody expects you to be flawless. The goal is not perfection, the goal is self-awareness. The ability to recognize when your emotions are distorting reality. The ability to recognize when pride is speaking louder than wisdom. The ability to recognize when you're becoming the source of the problem. That's emotional maturity. And it begins with observation. Start paying attention to your reactions. Notice what triggers you. Notice what makes you defensive. Notice what makes you angry. Notice what makes you feel threatened. Those moments reveal something important. They reveal where your growth needs to happen. Because strong emotional reactions often point toward hidden insecurities, hidden fears, hidden assumptions. And until you understand them, they continue controlling your behavior. The first person you must understand is yourself. Let's make this practical. The next time you find yourself in conflict, ask yourself 3 questions. What am I feeling? Why am I feeling it? What part of this situation am I responsible for? Most people skip those questions. They immediately focus on the other person. But transformation begins when you turn the spotlight inward. Not because you're always wrong, because you're the only person you can change. You don't need their permission. You don't need their cooperation. You don't need them to improve before you begin improving. That's where your power lives. Inside your choices, inside your awareness, inside your willingness to learn. One of the clearest signs of wisdom is the ability to laugh at your past mistakes. Not because those mistakes were funny, because you've learned from them. Growth means recognizing how foolish you once were, and realizing you're probably still foolish in ways you haven't yet discovered. That realization keeps you humble. It keeps you teachable. It keeps you growing. It's not about judgment. It's about honesty. It's not about shame. It's about responsibility. It's not about criticizing yourself. It's about understanding yourself. That's the key. The first person you must understand is yourself. The people who grow the most are rarely the smartest. They are usually the most self-aware. They are willing to examine themselves honestly. They are willing to admit mistakes. They are willing to learn. And because of that, they continue evolving. While others remain trapped in the same patterns year after year. You have a choice. Every day. You can defend your flaws, or you can improve them. You can protect your ego, or you can pursue growth. You can blame others, or you can take responsibility. One path feels comfortable, the other creates transformation. And if you've followed the lessons in this audiobook so far, you've already begun that transformation. You've learned to stop fighting every argument. You've learned to understand difficult people. You've learned to manage your ego. You've learned the power of silence. You've learned to stop feeding conflict. You've learned to see through other people's eyes. Now it's time for another important shift. Because once you understand yourself, you stop needing to prove yourself. You stop chasing validation. You stop fighting battles for approval. And you begin choosing something far more valuable. Peace. Chapter 9, Choose Peace Over Proof. Creator. Leader. At some point, all of them faced criticism, doubt, mockery, disbelief. People questioned their ideas, questioned their abilities, questioned their decisions. Imagine if they had stopped to argue with every critic. Imagine if they had spent their time defending themselves instead of developing themselves. Most would never have achieved anything meaningful. Their success came because they stayed focused. At some point, all of them faced criticism, doubt, mockery, disbelief. People questioned their ideas, questioned their abilities, questioned their decisions. Imagine if they had stopped to argue with every critic. Imagine if they had spent their time defending themselves instead of developing themselves. most would never have achieved anything meaningful. Their success came because they stayed focused. Chapter 10. Master people by mastering yourself. After everything we've discussed, one truth remains. The greatest victory in life is not over other people, it is over yourself. Most people spend years trying to control circumstances, trying to control outcomes, trying to control what others think, trying to control how others behave. And they fail, not because they are incapable, because they are fighting the wrong battle. The only person you can truly control is yourself. That's the key. The moment you understand that, life becomes simpler, not easier, but simpler. Because your attention shifts. You stop obsessing over what others are doing and start focusing on how you respond. You stop asking, how can I change them? And start asking, how can I improve myself? That shift changes everything. Control yourself and you control the situation. Repeat that. Control yourself and you control the situation. Control yourself and you control the situation. Most people hear those words and misunderstand them. They think emotional mastery means suppressing emotions. It doesn't. It means managing them, understanding them, directing them, rather than allowing them to direct you. Because emotions are powerful. Anger, fear, frustration, embarrassment, jealousy, pride. None of these emotions are inherently bad. The problem begins when they take control. The problem begins when your emotions start making decisions for you. That's when conflict grows. That's when relationships suffer. That's when good judgment disappears. You have a choice every day, in every conversation, in every disagreement, in every difficult situation. You can react emotionally or you can respond intentionally. One creates chaos, the other creates influence. The most influential people in the world understand this. Think about great leaders, not the loudest leaders, not the most aggressive leaders, the most effective leaders. When pressure rises, they remain calm. When criticism comes, they remain composed. When conflict appears, they remain focused. And because they remain steady, everyone around them becomes steadier as well. That's leadership. Leadership is emotional stability under pressure, and that stability creates influence. Imagine a ship in the middle of a storm. The waves are violent, the winds are strong, the passengers are afraid. What happens if the captain panics? Everyone panics. What happens if the captain remains calm? Confidence spreads. Nothing about the storm changed, but everything about the response changed. That's the key. Control yourself and you control the situation. Most difficult people gain power over you only when they gain control over your emotions. Think about that. The insulting coworker, the manipulative relative, the angry customer, the unreasonable stranger. The moment they provoke an emotional reaction from you, they influence your behavior. They influence your decisions. They influence your peace. But when you remain calm, their power diminishes. Not because they changed, because you did. That's emotional mastery. And emotional mastery is freedom. Freedom from constant frustration, freedom from unnecessary arguments, freedom from emotional manipulation, freedom from becoming a prisoner of other people's behavior. You don't need their permission. You don't need them to become reasonable. You don't need them to apologize. You don't need them to change before you find peace. Your peace begins the moment you take responsibility for your own reactions. That's where real power lives. Many people spend their lives searching for better circumstances, but what they truly need is better self-control. It's not about intelligence. It's about discipline. It's not about winning. It's about responding wisely. It's not about controlling others. It's about controlling yourself. That's the lesson. Throughout this audiobook, you've learned that arguments are rarely about truth. You've learned that difficult behavior often hides deeper fears. You've learned that ego creates unnecessary conflict. You've learned that some people are committed to misunderstanding you. You've learned the value of silence, the danger of feeding conflict, the importance of understanding perspectives, the necessity of self-awareness, the freedom that comes from choosing peace over proof. All of those lessons point toward one destination: self-mastery. Because every problem we've discussed becomes easier when you master yourself. Difficult people become easier. Conflict becomes easier. Criticism becomes easier. Misunderstanding becomes easier. Life becomes easier. Not because the world changes, because you change. That's the key. Control yourself and you control the situation. The strongest person is not the one who can dominate others. The strongest person is the one who can dominate their impulses. The strongest person is not the one who wins every argument. The strongest person is the one who knows which arguments are not worth having. The strongest person is not the one who controls the room. The strongest person is the one who controls themselves inside the room. You have a choice. Always. No matter who stands in front of you, no matter what challenge appears, no matter what criticism comes your way, you can surrender control to your emotions, or you can take responsibility for them. One path leads to endless conflict. The other leads to freedom. And that freedom is the ultimate lesson of this book. Because the goal was never to learn how to deal with idiots. The goal was to learn how to stop becoming one. The goal was to develop wisdom, patience, perspective, discipline, and above all, self-mastery. Control yourself and you control the situation. Remember those words, live those words, and watch how every relationship, every conflict, and every challenge in your life begins to change. Because when you master yourself, you no longer need to conquer anyone else. You have already won the most important battle of all. The lesson of this audiobook is simple, but it is not easy. Most conflicts are not solved by better arguments. They are solved by better awareness. Every time you feel the urge to prove yourself, pause. Every time you feel the need to win, question it. Every time you meet a difficult person, remember that understanding is more powerful than resistance. Stop feeding useless conflicts. Stop giving your energy to people who cannot receive it. Stop confusing being right with being wise. Learn to listen. Learn to observe. Learn to walk away when necessary. Most importantly, learn to recognize your own foolishness before pointing out someone else's. Because the strongest person in the room is not the loudest. The strongest person is the one who remains calm, clear, and in control. Your challenge is simple. For the next 7 days, refuse to enter a single unnecessary argument. Observe what happens. Watch how much peace, energy, and power returns to your life. Then ask yourself one question. How many battles was I fighting that never needed to be fought?